I thought moving to Willow Creek would be the fresh start my family needed. The streets were quiet, the lawns perfectly manicured, and the neighbors waved politely as they jogged past. It looked like the kind of place where kids could ride their bikes without fear, and grown-ups could sip coffee on their porches without being yelled at for a crooked flower pot. I imagined lazy Sunday afternoons, my daughter laughing as she played in the yard, and a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. Then Karen arrived. You know the type, heels clicking on the sidewalk like a warning siren, perfectly styled hair, sunglasses perched on her nose even though it was cloudy, and an aura of self-righteous authority that could suffocate an entire neighborhood. She introduced herself with a smile so thin it barely existed, and then proceeded to glance around like she owned everything, including our yard, our house, and for all I knew, our souls. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe she was just a little intense, I told myself. Maybe everyone who joined an HOA board thought they were the neighborhood police, but then the notices started arriving in the mail. Violation of HOA guidelines, your mailbox is crooked. Violation, your garden gnome does not meet community aesthetic standards. Violation, your hedge is 1.5 inches too tall. I swear, it felt like Karen had a measuring tape permanently glued to her hands. My daughter Lily was 6 years old, full of energy, and brimming with courage despite her disability. She loved our little yard. It was her playground, her castle, her safe space. One sunny afternoon, she was in her wheelchair, spinning in circles and waving to the neighbors, when I saw Karen storm up our driveway like she had an urgent mission from the HOA gods. You can't park that way, she barked at no one in particular, and this wheelchair ramp isn't regulation compliant. I blinked. Did she just call a wheelchair ramp non-compliant? My stomach tightened. I tried to explain calmly that the ramp had been approved by the city, that it met every safety standard, but she waved me off like I was a child trying to reason with a thundercloud. She stepped closer, her heels digging into the grass, and I realized too late that she was not just annoying, she was dangerous. Before I could react, she gestured wildly at the yard, then somehow impossibly shoved Lily's wheelchair. I froze as the chair tipped over and I heard that sickening crack. Time slowed. Lily screamed, a sound that cut through me sharper than any alarm. I ran to her side, heart hammering, and lifted her from the ground. Her arm bent in a way it shouldn't, and I felt a surge of panic I hadn't felt since life taught me some very hard lessons I don't usually talk about. Karen stood there, blinking, as if the chaos she had caused was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It's just an accident, she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. Don't make a big deal out of it. Just then, our neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez came rushing over, shouting, "Call an ambulance." A few moments later, paramedics arrived, lifting Lily gently onto a stretcher and securing her for the ride to the hospital. I followed, gripping her hand, trying to stay composed while my mind raced. And Karen? She lingered in the driveway, hands on her hips, looking like a heroine in her own story, entirely unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. As the ambulance doors closed, I felt something shift inside me. I smiled politely at Karen, the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea who you just messed with." Because she didn't. She had no idea that the quiet mom in the minivan, the one who always nodded politely during HOA meetings, had spent years handling dangerous situations, tracking people who were far more reckless than her, and coming out on top every single time. And as the sirens faded in the distance, I made a silent promise to myself. Karen was about to find out that breaking my daughter's arm wasn't just a personal crime, it was the beginning of her own undoing. Willow Creek had seemed perfect, but perfection, I realized, can attract the worst kind of storm, and Karen had just started raining hers down. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and the sound of my daughter's quiet sobs. Lily's hand was small, fragile in mine, and I kept repeating over and over that everything was going to be okay, even though a knot in my chest told me otherwise. Hospitals have a way of magnifying fear, turning every beeping monitor and hurried nurse into a threat. But nothing compared to the horror of watching my daughter's arm bent at the wrong angle, broken because of someone else's careless arrogance. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be found at first. I later found out she had driven slowly past the hospital, peering in through the windows like she was checking for a scene she could control. Typical Karen. Always thinking she's the center of attention, always thinking she's untouchable. I clenched my jaw and ignored her. My focus was entirely on Lily. At the emergency room, the staff rushed her onto a stretcher. A nurse held her hand, trying to calm her, while a doctor quickly assessed the damage. I hovered nearby, feeling both helpless and furious. I wanted to scream, to confront Karen right then and there, but I knew that any misstep could make this worse. I had to stay calm, precise, and controlled. As they moved her into X-ray, I finally allowed myself a moment to think about Karen. That woman had the audacity to stand there, smug as a cat, and try to convince me it was just an accident. Just an accident. My 6-year-old daughter in excruciating pain, all because she decided to throw her authority around like it was a playground game. I felt a cold, simmering anger building, the kind that comes when someone crosses a line you don't forgive. While Lily's arm was being stabilized, I kept replaying the moment over and over. Karen's expression, her careless shove, the way she acted as if she had done nothing wrong. And then it hit me, the way she handled power, the way she thought she could manipulate the HOA and neighbors, the way she had no idea who she was dealing with. I hadn't mentioned my past to anyone in the neighborhood. Most people assumed I was just a regular mom, quiet and polite. They didn't know I had spent years as a federal agent, handling dangerous situations, tracking criminals, and staying calm under pressure that would make most people crumble. This wasn't about intimidation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And Karen had just given me a reason to act. As I sat in the stark hospital room, the smell of antiseptic and the hum of fluorescent lights pressing down on me, I held Lily's hand and made a silent vow. Karen's arrogance, her sense of invincibility, was going to be her undoing. But for now, I had to focus on Lily, on keeping her calm while the doctors worked. Every little movement made her wince. Every sound made her flinch. I whispered encouragements, told her how brave she was, how strong she was, how we were going to get through this together. Meanwhile, Karen had already started her damage control. That afternoon, she posted a message on the HOA forum, pretending to express concern while subtly insinuating that I was overreacting. She wrote, "Accidents happen, but some neighbors make too big a deal out of nothing." Classic Karen. Even in the face of someone being hurt, she couldn't help herself. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. My neighbors, as always, were a mixed bag. Some expressed sympathy for Lily, sending texts and flowers. Others seemed hesitant, tiptoeing around Karen's influence, afraid of taking sides. It was astonishing, the power she wielded, and the fear she could instill in people who weren't even directly involved. But I didn't have time to worry about them. My daughter's well-being was my only concern. Hours passed. Painkillers, x-rays, the doctor explaining the extent of the break. It was serious, but not permanent. She would heal slowly but surely, and I promised her that nothing Karen did would define her or our lives. But I also knew something else. Karen's reckoning was coming. She had no idea what she had awakened, no clue who I really was or what I was capable of. And as I held my daughter's hand, brushing her hair from her face and promising her everything would be okay, I let the smallest, quietest smile slip across my face. Willow Creek thought it had seen its worst day. But Karen had no idea that for every shove, every arrogant comment, and every petty violation, she had just signed her own invitation to a storm she could never survive. After Lily's surgery, I thought the worst was over. The doctors had set her arm and strapped it up, assuring me that she would heal, though slowly. But anyone who's ever dealt with someone like Karen knows that the worst is never over. Not when someone thrives on control and petty vengeance. The next morning, I sat in the hospital room watching my daughter sleep, her small face peaceful despite the bandages and bruises. I tried to breathe, tried to slow the rapid-fire thoughts running through my mind. Karen was still out there, probably drafting her next HOA post, probably smirking at the thought of making us miserable from a distance. And I had to admit something I hadn't told a soul in years. I wasn't just a mom who could tolerate injustice. I was someone who had spent decades in positions where staying calm under pressure wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. People who underestimated me usually regretted it. The hospital phone rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez from next door. She wanted to make sure Lily was okay and to offer some support. "You have to be careful with that Karen," she whispered, lowering her voice. "She doesn't play fair." I smiled faintly. "I've got this," I said, though I didn't elaborate. She didn't need to know the half of it. While Lily napped, I scrolled through my phone and saw it. Karen's post on the HOA forum. As expected, it was filled with concerned theater, thinly veiled blame, and a dash of patronizing advice. She suggested we handle things more gracefully and reminded everyone that accidents happen. The audacity. It was the kind of thing that would make a sane person scream, but I simply shook my head. Karen had no idea that what she thought of as influence was about to become her own undoing. The neighbors began to murmur. Some texted me privately, offering their support. A few even admitted that they were scared to speak out because of Karen's reputation. I couldn't help but smirk. Reputation can be a funny thing. People like Karen feed off it, but a strong plan and patience can turn it into a trap. Lily woke up, groaning and rubbing her arm. "Mommy, my arm hurts," she said, her small voice cracking. I held her hand and squeezed gently. "I know, baby, I know, but you're so strong. You're going to heal, and that woman isn't going to ruin our lives." She gave me a weak smile, but the trust in her eyes reminded me why this wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting my family and showing her that courage isn't measured by the size of your threats. It's measured by how you rise after someone tries to knock you down. Later that evening, Karen showed up at the hospital. I saw her through the window, peering into Lily's room with a calculated expression. Her timing was impeccable, just like the drama she thrived on. I didn't answer when she rang the call button. Instead, I watched her fidget, realizing too late that she had no real authority here. No control. Just her ego, which was about to get a harsh reality check. I spent the next few days quietly gathering information. Camera footage from outside our house, witnesses who had seen her harassment firsthand, copies of her HOA emails, and even a few screenshots from social media where she boasted about her self-proclaimed authority. Karen loved attention, but she never considered the possibility that her behavior could be documented and exposed. And all the while, I had to keep up the facade of calm. My neighbors still saw me as a quiet mom, my daughter recovering in her hospital bed. They didn't see the meticulous planning, the careful collection of evidence, or the quiet promise I had made to myself. Karen had no idea that I was methodical, patient, and experienced at turning situations like this to my advantage. By the time we left the hospital, Lily was bandaged but smiling. She held my hand, proud of how brave she had been. I whispered to her, "One day you'll see that strength isn't just about fighting, it's about being smart, watching, and waiting for the right moment." She nodded, still too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the intensity in my voice. As we drove home, I glanced at our quiet street, imagining Karen plotting her next move, thinking she had won. Little did she know the calm you see is often the eye of the storm. And the storm, well, it was only just beginning. Coming home from the hospital should have been a relief, but Willow Creek had a way of reminding you that peace is often temporary. Karen had already turned our little drama into the next big HOA saga. Within hours, there were emails, complaints, and posts on the community forum, her usual mix of concern and passive-aggressive accusations. She even had the audacity to suggest that I was overreacting, and that maybe Lily's accident wasn't a big deal. I read it once, shook my head, and promptly saved every word. Evidence, I reminded myself, evidence is power. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer the very next day. The office smelled of polished wood and legal briefs, a perfect combination of order and tension. I explained everything: the shove, the broken arm, the ambulance ride, and the relentless harassment from Karen. My lawyer nodded, jotting down notes, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. She didn't say it, but I could tell she recognized Karen for what she was, a bully who had finally stepped over the line. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with Lily, who was quietly coloring, her arm in a soft sling. I tried to focus on her laughter and avoid thinking about Karen, but it wasn't possible. Karen had a way of invading every corner of your life, especially when she thought she could manipulate people with her self-importance. She had already sent letters to the HOA board claiming I was hostile and disruptive, and I knew she was hoping the neighbors would believe her lies. The HOA meeting was a circus. Karen strutted in like she was about to crown herself queen, clipboard in hand and a smile that looked rehearsed. She accused me of exaggerating, claimed Lily's fall was unfortunate but trivial, and suggested that maybe we should all just calm down. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air, each one a testament to her ignorance. Every person in the room could see the truth if they wanted to. They just needed to pay attention. I didn't speak much during the meeting. Instead, I listened, watched, and cataloged every word, every gesture, every laugh she threw in an attempt to charm the board. It was almost impressive how she could be so clueless about her own undoing. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing. Cameras, emails, witness statements, all lined up like pieces of a chess game I intended to win. Karen was so focused on performing, she didn't even notice that the board had started asking pointed questions about her prior conduct. Neighbors whispered to each other, some expressing concern, others hesitating because of Karen's influence. I could feel their fear, and I understood it. Karen thrived on intimidation, but fear is a fragile thing when you have a strategy and patience. I began to smile inwardly, imagining the moment when Karen's carefully constructed world would start to unravel piece by piece. Back at home, I reviewed the recordings from the cameras I had installed earlier. Every shove, every threatening gesture, every petty complaint from Karen was captured. Even her morning walk, where she had scowled at Lily playing in the yard, was on tape. I labeled each clip carefully, backing them up twice, and made notes. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice and proving to the neighborhood that no one, no matter how self-righteous, was above the rules. Later that evening, Karen posted yet another concerned message in the forum, complete with emojis that made her seem friendly and approachable. I couldn't help but laugh softly. She thought she was charming the community, but all she was doing was writing more material that would eventually serve as evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I tucked Lily into bed, her small hand in mine, I whispered softly, "We'll get through this, baby. And that woman, she won't know what hit her." She looked up at me, sleepy but trusting, and squeezed my hand. In that moment, I felt a surge of determination. Karen had started a war, but she didn't even realize that the quiet mom she had mocked and underestimated was far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. Willow Creek might have looked like the perfect neighborhood, but it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. And Karen had just lit the fuse. Karen wasn't satisfied with just one confrontation or one broken arm. No, for her, the game had just begun. I could tell she was plotting her next move even before she sent the first message. By the second day back home from the hospital, she had already launched a campaign of passive-aggressive posts, thinly veiled accusations, and false allegations on the HOA forum. It was almost impressive how dedicated she was to making our lives miserable. But that impressive was followed quickly by a sinking feeling that this would be her undoing. She sent emails claiming that we were endangering the neighborhood, and even tried to paint Lily's accident as somehow our fault. One of my neighbors, timid and unsure, forwarded the emails to me with a nervous, "I thought you should see this." I read each one carefully, storing them like pieces of evidence in a larger puzzle. Every exaggeration, every lie, every smarmy smile she included in photos posted online was another brick in the wall that would eventually come crashing down on her. Meanwhile, I quietly set up more cameras around the property. Not the creepy kind, just enough to capture the reality of Karen's relentless harassment. Every sidewalk stroll, every looming presence at our front gate, every attempt to intimidate my family was recorded and time-stamped. She thought she was clever, but she didn't realize she was performing for an invisible audience, one that was entirely on my side. Lily, as usual, was a bright spot in the middle of the storm. Despite her bandaged arm, she laughed and joked with me, making quips about Karen's ridiculous behavior. "Mom, do you think she practices that face in front of a mirror?" she asked one afternoon, and I couldn't help but chuckle quietly. Even through all this chaos, she reminded me why it was important to stay calm, to plan carefully, and to never let anger cloud judgment. Karen's next move was classic. She tried to rally the neighbors, sending messages about safety concerns and community standards, hoping to turn them against us. A few people bought into her theatrics, but most were hesitant, watching and waiting to see what would happen next. I could see the cracks forming in her plan. Fear only works when people believe in it. Once doubt creeps in, fear becomes fragile, and I intended to show everyone exactly how fragile. I spent hours compiling everything: videos, emails, forum posts, screenshots. Each piece was labeled, time-stamped, and backed up in triplicate. It wasn't just about proving her wrong. It was about exposing the pattern of harassment and manipulation she had woven into the neighborhood. Karen had a reputation for controlling others, but she had underestimated the quiet ones, the observant ones, the ones who didn't need to shout to be heard. Then came the subtle psychological games. Karen would show up at the edge of our yard, pretending to check the community boundaries. I would wave politely, nod, smile, acting like nothing bothered me, all while recording her every move. I could see the frustration building on her face as her usual tactics failed. She was angry, flustered, and starting to make mistakes, and that was when I knew the trap was set. The neighbors began to notice. Some whispered, some nodded approvingly when they saw me calmly handling Karen's antics. The fear that once surrounded her began to dissipate, replaced by curiosity and doubt. Karen didn't realize that every attempt to assert dominance was now visible, documented, and going to be used against her. One night, after tucking Lily into bed, I reviewed the recordings again, noticing every detail I had missed the first time. Her smirk when she thought she was clever, the way she strutted like she owned the street, the careless manner in which she tried to intimidate. It all mattered. Every little act of arrogance, every minor violation of her own rules, was another step toward her eventual fall. I whispered to Lily, "See, baby. Sometimes, people who think they're the strongest, the smartest, the most powerful, they make one mistake after another. And when they do, justice has a way of catching up." She smiled sleepily, clutching her stuffed animal. I smiled too, knowing that this was far from over. Karen had doubled down, but in doing so, she had handed me everything I needed. She had lit the fuse, and now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment. The calm before the storm was coming to an end. By the time part 6 rolled around in my mind, it was clear that Karen had no idea who she was really dealing with. Every step she took, every post she made, every smug little smile she thought was clever, it was all leading to the same place, her undoing. The calm I had maintained for weeks wasn't just patience, it was preparation. And now, the storm was ready to hit. The day began quietly. Willow Creek, with its perfect lawns and quiet streets, seemed oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. I took Lily outside to play in the yard, her arm still in a soft sling but her spirit unbroken. She laughed as I pushed her gently on the swing, completely unaware of the trap being laid out right under Karen's nose. Karen, of course, couldn't resist. She appeared at the edge of our property, clipboard in hand, packing and peering like a cat waiting for a mouse to appear. I smiled and waved politely. "Good morning, Karen," I called as casual as could be. Her eyes narrowed. "Are you inspecting again?" I asked lightly, as though I were discussing the weather. She huffed, a tiny flare of annoyance crossing her face. She didn't realize that this inspection was just another part of her own downfall being recorded in high-definition video. I had compiled everything carefully: video footage of her harassment, screenshots of her HOA posts, copies of emails, and witness statements from neighbors who had finally gathered the courage to speak. Every interaction, every violation, every petty lie, it was all documented. She had spent weeks building her reputation as an unstoppable force of intimidation, and I had spent weeks quietly dismantling it piece by piece. It was time to start the final phase. I contacted a few of the HOA board members, people who had been quietly observing Karen's theatrics but were hesitant to speak up. I presented the evidence carefully, calmly, letting them review the files at their own pace. Their reactions were priceless. First disbelief, then shock, then a slow, dawning understanding that Karen's authority had been a house of cards all along. Meanwhile, Karen was oblivious. She sent her usual barrage of emails and forum posts, thinking she was still in control. She had no idea that everything she had done, every act of harassment, had been captured and neatly organized into a package that left no room for excuses. She was about to learn the hard truth. The quiet ones you underestimate are often the most dangerous. The tension built as neighbors began to whisper and exchange glances. A few even started questioning Karen in subtle ways, challenging her version of events without realizing the full extent of the evidence I had. The fear she had cultivated for so long began to crack. Her usual confidence faltered, and I watched, quietly savoring the moment, as panic and doubt replaced her arrogance. That evening, I reviewed the recordings one last time. Her every gesture, every smug look, every shove and threatening stance, it was all there, perfectly documented. I organized everything into a timeline, ready to present it in a clear, undeniable way. Justice doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be precise. And this was as precise as it could get. Lily, as always, was the light in the storm. She watched me with wide, trusting eyes, unaware of the careful strategy unfolding. "Mom," she said, "will that mean Karen won't bother us anymore?" I smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Not just that, baby. She's about to learn that you don't mess with people who protect their family. Ever." She nodded, satisfied with the explanation, blissfully innocent but perfectly in tune with the energy of the household. As night fell, Willow Creek seemed calm again. The quiet streets hid the tension building behind closed doors, the storm gathering strength. Karen had spent weeks escalating, intimidating, and plotting, and she had no idea that every move had been anticipated, recorded, and prepared for. I leaned back in my chair, sipping a cup of tea, feeling that familiar calm that comes with preparation. The storm wasn't just coming, it was here, invisible, controlled, and unstoppable. Karen thought she was untouchable, but the moment she realized what had been happening behind the scenes, it would be too late. The calm before the storm had ended. And soon, Karen was going to experience a reckoning she would never forget. The day of reckoning arrived quietly at first. Willow Creek seemed unchanged, its perfect lawns and quiet streets betraying nothing of the chaos that was about to unfold. I woke early, my mind sharp and focused, reviewing every piece of evidence one last time. Emails, videos, screenshots, witness statements. It was all there, organized and undeniable. Karen had spent weeks building her empire of fear, but empires crumble when someone knows exactly how to dismantle them. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for mid-morning. I arrived with Lily, her sling in place, her small hand in mine. She glanced up at me with curiosity, unaware that the quiet, orderly mom she trusted had been preparing for this moment since the day her arm was broken. "Mom," she whispered, "are they going to make Karen behave?" I smiled softly. "Something like that, baby, just watch." Karen arrived shortly after, clipboard in hand, looking more confident than ever. She had no idea what was waiting for her. As she strutted into the meeting room, I could see her scanning the crowd for allies, trying to assert her usual dominance. But this time, the room was different. The neighbors weren't scared. They were watching, observing, ready to see the truth revealed. The meeting began. Karen launched into her usual speech, full of self-righteous indignation. She waved her hands, smiled at the board, and made claims about concerns for the neighborhood and overreacting parents. I sat quietly, letting her words echo in the room, knowing that each lie, each exaggeration, had already been countered by the evidence I had meticulously gathered. When it was my turn, I calmly stood, placed a folder on the table and said, "Everything you've said and done is documented." I handed over the emails, the videos, the screenshots. The board members leaned in, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief, and then slowly to shock. One by one, they realized that Karen's reputation for authority was built on intimidation, lies, and petty harassment. Karen's face went pale. Her confidence faltered, replaced by confusion and panic. She tried to speak, to regain control, but every word she uttered only reinforced the evidence against her. The more she protested, the more the board could see the pattern, her obsession with control, her escalation, and the way she had targeted a child and her family for her own ego. Neighbors began to murmur quietly, nodding, exchanging glances that said what they had been too afraid to say before. She had gone too far. The air in the room shifted. Karen's carefully constructed world, built on fear and manipulation, was unraveling in front of everyone. I watched silently, letting the moment unfold. Karen tried to assert herself, to claim innocence, to suggest that we were overreacting. But no one was buying it. Every piece of evidence was undeniable. The board, once hesitant, now acted decisively. Fines were reversed, warnings were struck from records, and Karen's influence over the HOA was stripped away. She tried one last desperate plea, but it fell flat, powerless against the truth. I glanced at Lily, who watched the scene with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and pride. She squeezed my hand. "Did we win, Mom?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We did, baby. Justice doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers quietly until the right moment comes." Karen left the room defeated, her head held high only for appearances, but her face told the real story. Disbelief, humiliation, and a sense of power lost forever. She had underestimated us, underestimated me, and for the first time, she realized the danger of crossing someone who protects their family at all costs. As we walked home, the tension that had been coiled for weeks slowly began to unwind. Lily laughed softly, leaning against me, her courage shining brighter than ever. I reflected on the power of patience, preparation, and quiet strategy. Karen's storm had been met with an even stronger force: careful planning, resilience, and truth. By the time the sun set over Willow Creek, the neighborhood was quiet again, but different. The fear that had once hung over the streets like a dark cloud was gone. Karen would never be the same, and for the first time in weeks, my daughter and I could breathe, knowing that justice had been served, not through chaos, but through clarity and resolve. The storm had hit, and Karen had been completely unprepared. But in the calm that followed, we discovered something even more important. The quiet ones, the careful planners, the ones who protect what matters most, they are often the strongest people in the room. And Karen, well, she would never forget that lesson. The days after the HOA meeting felt surreal. Willow Creek looked the same: perfect lawns, quiet streets, and the faint hum of sprinklers, but everything had changed. Karen's reign of petty terror was over, stripped away by evidence, truth, and the quiet patience that she had never anticipated. She was still in the neighborhood, of course, lurking on her porch, scrolling through her phone, probably replaying the meeting over and over in her head, but her power was gone. Completely gone. Lily was healing. Her arm was still in a sling, but her smile had returned, brighter and braver than ever. Watching her play in the yard without fear was the greatest reward I could have imagined. Every laugh, every small triumph, reminded me that we had protected more than just a family. We had protected innocence and courage from someone who tried to destroy it. Neighbors came by one, offering congratulations, hugs, and words of relief. "We never realized how bad it had gotten," one whispered. "Thank you for standing up." Another shook my hand, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and gratitude. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what had been endured, a reminder that the real victories often happen away from the spotlight, in small, decisive moments. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated. Her usual strut was gone, replaced by a hesitant, uncertain pace. She had no friends in the HOA anymore, no influence, and no way to twist the narrative in her favor. The letters, the emails, the forum posts, all the power she thought she had were nullified. And she knew it. You could see it in the way she avoided eye contact, the small tremor in her voice when she muttered a forced good morning to neighbors. It was the subtle victory that comes from watching someone realize they have been thoroughly outplayed. I kept my own smile quiet but satisfied. The truth is, people like Karen only understand one lesson: actions have consequences, and underestimating the quiet ones is the gravest mistake they can make. For weeks, I had stayed calm, collected, and methodical, and now the result was absolute. Justice hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been precise, undeniable, and completely satisfying. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, I held her small hand and whispered, "You see, baby, sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who shout the loudest. Sometimes it's the ones who stay calm, watch, and wait for the right moment to act." She looked up at me, sleepy but understanding, and squeezed my hand tightly. "I think I get it, Mommy. We were brave together." And we had been. Through the chaos, the fear, and Karen's relentless bullying, we had remained strong. We had turned her arrogance and obsession with control against her, and in doing so, we had reclaimed not just our yard, but our sense of safety and peace. Willow Creek would never forget that quiet family in the minivan who refused to be intimidated. The neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Sprinklers hissed in the morning sun, kids rode their bikes down the streets, and the occasional dog bark punctuated the calm. Life moved on, but the lesson lingered. Power isn't about fear or intimidation, it's about integrity, courage, and knowing when and how to act. Karen had learned it too late. That night, I sat by the window, looking out over the street. I thought about everything that had happened: the shove, the broken arm, the countless emails, and the board meetings. And I realized that true strength isn't measured by the battles you fight in public, but by the quiet, deliberate actions you take when no one is watching. Lily snuggled against me, her head resting on my shoulder, and I felt a wave of gratitude and relief. We had survived the storm together, stronger for it, and ready to face whatever came next. Willow Creek was peaceful again, and Karen's reign of petty terror was nothing more than a memory. I whispered softly, more to myself than anyone else, "Some people underestimate quiet families. They think we're harmless. And some people never learn their lesson." And for the first time in weeks, I truly believed it. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.